Hi guys, it's Professor Fernandez again, and I'm here to talk a little bit more about audience. It's your second step of the rhetorical situation. So it's really important to understand each step so that you know what to look for when you're doing your own rhetorical situation. All right. So let's do a screen share and I will talk to you a little bit more about audience here. All right. So you should see here. Yes, you should see here the steps that we wrote last time. So last time, the previous video, we talked about writer's purpose and some of the things you want to look for writer's purpose. And so now we're going to actually tackle audience. We're trying to tackle the blue star. So let's tackle audience here. So when we're looking at audience, it's exactly what this is. This step of the rhetorical situation, it's the easiest step, but it's also seemingly easy. There are two things you need to look into for audience. You need to look at the intended audience, and then you need to look at the unintended audience. And I'm writing a little space in between here because I'm going to write things under here. All right, so the intended audience and the unintended audience. So the intended audience is exactly what it means. Who was this originally for? Um, and so this can be tricky because something like Letter from Birmingham Jail from Dr. King is super easy. He tells you who it is. He says, to my fellow clergymen. So he's writing to his fellow clergy because they wrote a letter to the editor addressed to him. So he's responding to it. So he's telling you already who the intended audience is already. So you know that he is giving it to you. But something a little bit trickier, like Harrison Bergeron. I've talked about it in the other videos. It's a short story that you'll be reading fairly soon during 1302 for my regular class, for my honors class. Sorry, you won't be reading it, but you'll be reading other works of fiction as well. So hold on. All right. So um who was the intended audience for something like Harrison Bergeron, which is a short story? It's really difficult to tell because it's not, it's not in the story. It's not in the poem. If you're reading something like Emily Dickinson or Edgar Allan Poe, um, um, who, who's Emily's art audience? I don't know. And this has been a debate for the many English people, but we don't know. They don't tell us usually. However, how we can find out who was the original audience is where it was published. And let me write ah okay, written in peace. Okay, so I want to make sure I write all the notes down. So where this thing was published, right? So if it was published, say in a magazine or newspaper or website or a book, etc., 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 then we kind of know what it is, right? We have to look at the audience of the magazine, the audience of the newspaper, of that website. We want to look at the about page. And we want to formulate an opinion, right? So if we see, for example, something that was published in, say, like the Atlantic, right? So you may read something that was published in the Atlantic magazine. What does that tell you about the audience? Well, you have to go into the about page and see who they think the audience is. You could see that maybe the audience may be more liberal minded. They make probably a little bit more money than your average person. They are well versed in going online and like reading things, right? So they have they have computer and internet skills with a Z, that maybe a lot of people don't have, or have the basics. Maybe they are active on social media. So you want to formulate the audience based on where it was published. I want to look at the about page, who they think their audience is, because they're not going to publish something for they're not going to publish something that isn't for their audience. So you want to look at that, and that's the intended audience, right? So you want to do that look. That look see on the about page. You want to make and formulate those inferences. And this is why this takes a little bit longer. And why I say it's seemingly and it's deceptively easy, because something again like Letter from Birmingham Jail, you already know. You already know that it's for the clergy. But something like Harrison Bergeron or any other essays that we read, um, the Hope letter from Harvey Milk, if you're in my 1302, who was that for? Right? You don't know. You got to look it up. I don't have enough room because I underestimated, but I'm going to put a number 2 right here. All right. So you want to do you want to look at who was it was originally um for. You want to it was if that was written in the piece or whether it was published, and then you want to look at maybe like, was it a speech? Right? Well, if you're in my 1302, we'll be looking at lots of speeches. So speeches, and who may also be an intended audience based on reach. For example, if we are reading something, maybe like a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and they are saying their speech, they usually start with like the King and Queen of Norway, thank you to the royalty, thank you to the committee, um, and it's addressed to them. They also are are discuss or talking to people who are there, who are there giving the speech, but they also know that that thing is going to be it's going to reach a worldwide, or reach a certain audience in the world, right? So that's another intended audience. For my regular 1302, it's the same with Letter from Birmingham Jail. We know that it was originally for the clergy in Birmingham, Alabama, but it was also published in the Atlantic magazine in the 1960s. There was no internet, so it was in the magazine. So it not only reached its intended audience of the clergy, but it also reached another intended audience, which were the readers of the Atlantic Monthly magazine. So those were intended audiences, right? So I say speeches because usually with speeches, you have a bigger reach, but that is not necessarily just a speech. So it's for my 1302 honors, the Harvey Milk, um, speech had an intended audience and also had some reach too. So those that's intended audience. Now, unintended audience is super easy. Like, who actually got a hold of this and they got it like secondhand? It's usually you guys. Students, scholars, you know, people that have to read it for class, right? There may be people who are fans, like weird fans like me. I'm a fan of Dr. King's work on the page, so I will read anything he wrote just so I get a sense of how he writes and how he puts together an argument. Um, So you have those as unintended audience. And there could be other unintended audience, maybe some folks from social media, right? It wasn't for that particular audience, but maybe you're friends with somebody who is part of the intended audience, and then you click on it because it sounds interesting. You're the unintended audience because it wasn't for you, it was for the intended audience. But hey, join the party anyway, right? So that is another thing for unintended audience. It's like, who comes upon this piece of rhetoric that wasn't part of the original family for this rhetoric, all right, or the original audience for this family or for this rhetoric. So that is what um, audience is. There's intended and unintended audience. And under that, you have lots of things to consider. Who, if you were looking for an intended audience, who was this originally published for? I'm sorry, who was this originally regarding? Was it, is it written in the piece? There's sometimes it is, sometimes it's a letter, and so it says dear such and such, so it's intended for that person. You want to look at where it was published, um, and who the audience for that is. And especially if it's like a speech or sometimes a letter, it'll be republished or published in a magazine, and it'll have a larger reach, and it was for that intended audience as well. They're part of the conversation, and the writers bringing them into the conversation. Then you have unintended audience. Um, Students are always the unintended audience. Very few things are written for you guys. Sorry. Sorry, very few things are written for you guys. But you study things, and you guys are also scholars. So that also means that you guys are part of the unintended audience. There are fans who like to read all this stuff. And of course, those things with social media, those who share it, who are part of the intended audience, but people who grab a hold of it and they're part of the unintended audience. I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you need any help, and I will see you in the next video.